Hey, it's Chad Brown. Welcome back to the Disability Expert Podcast, all things disability. Back again for part 2 of gig economy jobs. Hopefully if you're in a gig economy job and you're considering disability, or you've already filed an application, you can start to understand how you can still have a gig economy job and get on disability, but also why you may very well not be eligible. So let's just start with the Uber driver, because I think Uber and DoorDash are the ones we see the most. But let's just start with the Uber driver. So we have an Uber worker, and let's just say they're working 30. I probably should have brought up. I've got a pen. Let's write it down. So we got an Uber worker, and let's just say they're working 30 hours a week. Okay, so they're driving about 30 hours a week. Let's just take a second and go through what we're going to do with each of the 3 tests. And if you need more facts, just say, give me some facts, and I'll make them up. If I can do anything, I can sort of make up facts. So we got an Uber driver. So let's look at test 1, which is going to be significant services plus income. Okay, so walk us through that. How are we going to advise this Uber driver who's working 30 hours a week under test 1?
So the first part of test 1, significant services,
Okay.
we're there. They're driving for themselves, so
Right.
we have significant services. So the next question is going to be, well, how much are you making from Uber doing this specific job?
Okay, so let's just say our Uber worker, golly, let me just use some real numbers. Let's just say that they say, well, it's early in the year, but let's go back to 2025. We'll use 2025 numbers. And they filed a tax return, and on that tax return, they filed $30,000 in gross income. Okay, but their net income after all of their expenses for car and gas and whatever else they claimed that they only made $5,000 in 2025. So we got 30,000 gross income, 5,000 net income. That's what shows up on their tax return. How is that going to work out?
Doesn't sound like they had significant income from that job for last year. They only took home 5,000. So I think we're probably good under test 1.
Okay.
So now we get to move on to the next test.
The other thing, though, to understand, though, is they're going to do their own evaluation.
Yes.
Because on your tax return on your Schedule C is going to show how much you actually netted from your income. But Social Security Administration is not necessarily bound by how much you claim on your tax return. They're going to do their own assessment of income minus expenses, right?
Right.
Yeah. So generally, though, it's a pretty good guide. Like if you only net $5,000 out of the $30,000, it's highly unlikely that Social Security is going to run its test and they're going to come up with a different number. But understand, a lot of times what we get to is, well, you have a level of misunderstanding. It's actually more than one level of misunderstanding our clients have.
There's
layers of misunderstanding, which is, considering how complicated the rules are, we're not making fun of you for not understanding.
No, it's perfectly reasonable.
Yeah, but there are. So first they're like, well, I only made this on my tax return, failing to understand, well, that's not the test. But then they also need to understand, even in the test that would reasonably apply to your tax return, the tax return is not what they actually look at either. So we got Uber Steve. We got a name. What was that movie? Scuba Steve. Adam Sandler. What was it? Scuba? Okay, this is Uber Steve. I don't know. Maybe we can get a clip. Maybe our producer Heidi can we get a clip of Scuba Steve that we just anyway? Okay, so Uber Steve has gotten through test 1. Now let's go to test 2, where we're going to look at the comparability test or the comparability test. How is that going to play out for Steve? What are they going to do in test 2?
I'm thinking test 2 is probably not going to play out very well for Steve. So
okay.
I'm looking at these facts. He's driving 30 hours a week. He's bringing in, I think we said $30,000 last year.
$30,000 a year. Right.
So Social Security is going to look at comparability. Is this fairly similar to what a not disabled Uber driver or Lyft driver might make in the course of their work? And it sounds fairly close to what
it sounds like he's a cab driver.
Yeah, it sounds like he's a cab
or
driver.
he's a services driver, or he's a limo driver, or he's working for a service. It sounds a lot like that. He He gets in a car. He has a driver's license. He takes people from point A to point B. He may or may not open the door for them. He has to show up at a specific time. He takes them to a certain place. All of those would be factors that would weigh that it is a comparable job. But one of the things I think people need to understand, though, is the gig economy is not the normal economy. The gig economy has a level of flexibility, which is not only why some people choose to work in that space, because they really want the autonomy of being self-employed. They want to be able to make their own schedule. They want to be able to, work on Sunday if they want to, not work on Sunday if they want to, work nights, work weekends, take a 3-week vacation, that they have this level of flexibility. So how do you argue against comparability for Uber Steve if he's our client? Like, what are we going to go in and say, whoa, Judge, hold on, let's don't jump to the conclusion that he's going to fail the comparability test. What are some things we can say to possibly undermine that argument?
So some of the things I'll be asking Uber Steve is about the schedule itself. So does Uber Steve only Uber from 9 to 5 on set days, or does he take jobs as he's able to with his condition? So in other words, are there 3 days a week where he's not taking any jobs, and then he's making up for that on the days he's able to?
Right.
Does he have to cancel? Sometimes I've asked clients, well, how good is your driver rating on the app? And they'll tell me, oh my goodness, I've got so many 0-star reviews, they're about to kick me off.
Yeah.
And that can be relevant because that shows, okay, well, he's trying, but he cancels jobs so much, it's a miracle he's still on the app.
Yeah, without, and this sort of cuts both ways, because a lot of the times the jobs that people are doing in the gig economy, Uber Steve, there are actually comparable jobs where they work flexible schedules. So the fact that you make your own schedule doesn't necessarily undermine comparability, because if you can find comparable jobs where you have flexible scheduling, I think the real issues start to come when you look at sort of core job competencies, attendance, reliability. Let's say Uber Steve takes medications when he drives. Without being judgmental of Uber Steve, please don't take medicines and drive. The reality is sometimes, because they're being forced into work at one capacity, this is just about survival. Uber Steve's not driving because he necessarily wants to. He's in miserable pain. But would he actually be able to comply with maybe the requirements of passing a drug screen or whatever it is? So I think with the comparability test, it's a huge hurdle for the gig economy employee, worker. They're not an employee, I guess. But at the same time, don't forget, is it a comparable job is the question. So what we're trying to do is undermine that it's a comparable job so that we can be able to simply get to the next test, because if you lose at test 2, you lose. And remember, there's no income requirement in the comparability test. So you can't fall back and say, well, I lost X number of dollars, or even I was only working maybe less than full-time work. If you start, edging your hours up, it starts to look like a comparable job. You're going to lose, even if maybe your income was lower. So let's just say we got Uber Steve by. We got Uber Steve by test 1 and 2. Now Uber Steve is in test 3. And man, you thought his problems were bad before. Now we've got the worth of work test. So what are they going to do in evaluating Uber Steve's worth of work?
Worth of work, we're going to look at, well, what's the going hourly rate for a taxi cab driver? And sounds like this is not going to be a good test for Uber Steve either.
Right.
At 30 hours a week, that's going to be most likely over SGA.
Yeah, I mean, let's just say that the average cab driver makes, I don't know, let's just say they make $20 an hour. Now we're $600 a week. We're right at our $30,000, give or take, that he made for the year, and literally he's done. Yeah. He's done. So I think historically, oh golly, we used to see this with the famous hairdresser, cosmetologist. I used to hate this because it seems like we always would do fine in test 1, and test 2 you can make arguments one way or another, and then we get to test 3, and it was in test 3, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're dead in the water here. I think the reality, though, is the most important thing you can know if you're working in the gig economy, and we're going to get to the worth of work test, is it's basically just a numerical calculation. So the reality is you can take SGA, you can go to any search engine. I mean, goodness gracious, every search engine is driven by AI now. So it's not like you can't go and figure out what the national average is for that employee, or that employee who's doing that job. Take the high end of the range, divide it into SGA, and that's literally how many hours a week you can work without going over the test. Now, you can get into other issues. We're going to hit those in just a minute about how even if you survive step 1, there's still credibility issues that come into all of these cases. But in terms of just surviving the worth of work analysis, the reality is as long as you know how much another employee doing that job in the national economy, what they average to make, you can simply divide that number into SGA, and you have an hourly rate an hourly number that you can work and still stay below the rate, because you're going to meet the math. And if it's under the math, it's under the math. So Uber Steve, he's in a lot of trouble.
He's in a lot of trouble.
He's in a lot of trouble. But Uber Steve has come to us, and we say we've only been representing Uber Steve for a month or so, and we realize Uber Steve might not have been completely candid on intake about the number of hours that he worked. And so we said, hey, we really believe you have the conditions that you have, and goodness gracious, you're 57 years old, and you have had 2 back surgeries, and you do have a knee replacement, and you are taking some medications, and you are dealing with, like, the case on it, what we're losing on is the work. And he's like, I can't do it. Like I'm falling apart. Like I'm missing shifts. It was all I could do. December was a terrible month. January was bad. Here we are, the first of the year. How do you advise him about unsuccessful work attempts? How can he, continue to have a viable potential claim moving forward, even if his claim is dead in the water at this point? Does that mean it's over for him?
No, it doesn't necessarily mean it's over for him. So some of the questions we ask is, how long was he driving for Uber before all of this happened? Was it under 6 months so we can make an unsuccessful work attempt?
Right.
If it was over 6 months, then maybe, we go ahead and change that onset date to after the job ended.
Right.
And we move forward from there. Sometimes this doesn't happen as often, but sometimes we can do a closed period if he decides, actually, I had surgery and things got better, but I was out for 12 plus months.
Right.
Before I improved and went back to work. We can ask for a closed period of disability.
Yeah, because one of the things that happens a lot with gig economy jobs is, like, we do intake and they're not working. And I mean, our office, every phone conversation includes the question, "Are you working?" Because we realize that what happens is your inability to work and earn money doesn't always allow you to survive the time frame. So it's pretty common that we'll have people who come into our firm and who aren't working, and then some point along the way they start working, which is why it's so important for you to give us your information so that we can advise you. Because let's say that there was a substantial break of 30 days or whatever from his job, and let's say he was out 4 months before he went into the gig economy. Now he's been in the gig economy 4 months. He's like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, stop. Yeah. Like, we need to make this an unsuccessful work attempt, and then we're going to be okay. One of the things that strikes me, though, with these gig economy jobs, which is very different than sort of historical side hustles where, sometimes you were sort of like, I just hope you don't tell me what you're doing. Like, you did a job, you're made cash. I'm not condoning it, but I just don't want to know about it, right? Like, that's sort of what it looked like 20 years ago. Now, that's very, very different. But the beauty of the gig economy, though, is it is a workplace, for lack of a better phrase, where you can document.
Right.
So what sort of things can someone who's working in gig economy jobs do? First, know the rules. Like, watch the podcast, rewatch the podcast, figure out how self-employment rules work, because they're what's going to control this. But what can we do to to help them? What can we tell them and help them understand about documentation that can really change how these cases play out in hearings?
So the good thing about working through an app is there's usually going to be an electronic record of every time you've been paid through that.
Right.
And so that documentation can be pretty helpful to submit to Social Security to show, okay, well, we had, 2 or 3 good months maybe, and then look at how the earnings dropped off, or we
Right.
can show how many jobs you were actually taking, maybe how much of it was tips versus uh, income from the job itself. And so breaking that down at a really granular level can help the judge understand, okay, this is what was really going on.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the things we haven't talked about, and I want to sort of finish with this, and then if our producer doesn't absolutely scold me, we're going to finish with some just tips to help people sort of think about this, is just surviving the step one SGA analysis is not the end of the story for the disability client, because gig economy work also radically can change how a judge views your credibility about your limitations. So can you just sort of walk through a little bit about how do these jobs impact credibility analysis for the client as a whole, even if we're able to navigate and get through the earnings issues?
The credibility aspect of things is really difficult. I hear from clients all the time, I read the rules, I understand the step 3, I'm below SGA. Why are you asking me all of these questions? Why is that a problem? And the answer is, well, the credibility. This just gets us past step 1. And so depending on how the judge was inclined to view your case to start with, throw in, a below SGA part-time gig job, and it can make the judge much less inclined to approve your case for benefits. One example that I give is driving. Sometimes even in cases where person is not working at all, the judge just picks up on the fact, the activity of daily living of driving.
Right.
And they point to that as a reason that the client's not disabled because they can still drive to the grocery store.
Right.
And so I say all that because, we lose cases sometimes where it's even just personal driving
Right.
the judge cites. And so now we're throwing in this complication of, I'm driving for other people and getting paid to do it,
Yeah.
can really harm the credibility in the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand that the documentation matters, because one of the things, I tell people all the time, look, I'd much rather you not work at all, because then I can argue that you can't work.
Right.
Once you go to work, I can no longer argue that you can't work. Now I'm saying, well, you can't work on a full-time sustained basis without accommodation or assistance as defined by the Social Security Administration. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure out. That sounds a lot like lawyering.
That's a lot tougher sell.
Yeah, I mean, that's not, hire lawyers. They're good, especially expert lawyers who know about disability. But at the same time, it's much cleaner than to be showing why these rules are there. But at the same time, I don't live in some fantasy land where I think that your power bill pays itself, or that you're going to keep your home or your apartment if you can't pay the rent, or that you're going to be able to survive if you can't pay for basic medical treatment or medications or foods. So, while I understand it makes the case weaker, we need to understand from the client's perspective, they need to understand, okay, if we need to be able to explain why what you're doing doesn't undermine your credibility to the point where the judge feels like they have to deny you, which is why it's important to explain, hey, this is why my hours are limited. This is why my schedule is what it is. This is why I do this type of work and not that type of work. Oftentimes people have tried multiple jobs in the gig economy, and they find, well, they couldn't be the Amazon package deliverer because they couldn't do the lifting, but they could do the basic Uber driving, or maybe, they could DoorDash, but they couldn't deliver groceries. Right. So just having the nuance of what you're actually doing and actually documenting it, telling your doctor what you're doing, getting this somewhere else other than us just from your lawyer, I think really helps. So Uber Steve, I think Uber Steve probably dead in the water unless we can find an unsuccessful work attempt or he quits work. But regardless, there's a lot of people in that position. I think it's helpful. All right, let me just give you a couple tips here to end. Gig economy is a job. They're jobs, Social Security counts them as jobs. There's special rules that deal with them for self-employment. You need to know those so you know what you're getting into. Any one of the 3 steps fails you to SGA. There's 3 different tests they look at. You've got to navigate all 3. So not only do you need to understand what your worth is work in the economy and how your job compares to others. You also have to understand significant services and income, and you got to have a pretty robust understanding of all the tests, because if you fail one, you fail them all. Hours, documentation, they're everything. Like, you've got to document what you do. We have to be able to come in and prove that this really isn't full-time work if we can get past the step one and not have your credibility be blown. Don't forget there's unsuccessful work attempts. Just because you try to work doesn't mean you have to stay there. Golly, don't be confused by what your neighbors or friends say. Golly, I'm so tired of dealing with people like, well, I talked to Betty at church and she said that she thought it'd be fine. Don't do that. Like, get advice. Help. If you have an attorney representing you, you need to be telling them you're working. Do not hide that from them. They're there to help you, and they understand the rules. Be honest when you're trying to come into the disability process if you're talking to an attorney. And at the end of the day, candidly, the rules are complex. You probably need an attorney to navigate them for you. But if you're going to choose to do it on your own, know the rules, take good documentation, and honestly hang in there. I feel deeply for people who are in this extended wait periods. They're completely unreasonable. It's completely unnecessary. That's a different topic on why the Social Security Administration could do lots of things better than they do. But if you find yourself there, understand knowing the rules is your salvation to being able to navigate them. Because if you don't know the rules, you're almost inevitably going to violate them. All right, gig economy. There we go. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe, and until next time, have a good one. Thanks.